In Women's History Month today, we're going to talk about women in business. As of 2024, there's only 25 Australian women at the head of a corporation. In fact, you have more chance of heading up a corporation if your name is Peter or John than you do at being an Australian woman. So today we're going to talk about the first woman to be a CEO in a corporation in Australia, and that is Gail Kelly. Gail became the CEO of St George Bank in 2002, after the previous CEO died of a heart attack. In 2008, she became CEO of Westpac and orchestrated the merger of the two banks. 8 months later, the global financial crisis hit, and although Australia managed to withstand most of it, it placed a huge amount of pressure on her. Despite this, Kelly implemented a policy of ensuring 40% of managerial positions at Westpac were held by women. Not bad for a woman who started out as a bank teller in Pretoria, South Africa. When she retired in 2015, Westpac had doubled its profits. Obviously, it takes a lot of hard work and determination to get to that level in your career. However, one of the interesting things about Gail is that she doesn't minimise the role of luck in her successful career. In her autobiography, she talks about how fortunate she was to be born into a loving and supportive family and to have a loving and supportive relationship. These gave her solid foundations that she was able to work and thrive on. To achieve everything she did, Kelly took inspiration from a quote often attributed to Nelson Mandela. "There is no passion to be found playing small, in settling for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living." Today, Gail sits on numerous boards and continues to help women into leadership roles. In her own words, she says, "Dig deep, be bold, and have a go." In the second week of Women's History Month, we have a request. Today we're going to talk about Joan Kirner. She was the first female Premier in Victoria, but she wasn't the first in Australia. That was Dr. Carmen Lawrence in Western Australia just a few months earlier. So 1990 was a really big year for women in politics. Born in Essendon in 1938, Joan was the only child of working class parents. Smart and motivated, Joan grew up in a time when the higher education options for women were either nursing or teaching. So she duly became a teacher, married and had 3 children. The 1960s saw Australia begin to embrace considerable ideological and social change, and this helped Joan find her voice as a passionate advocate for state education and particularly the value of parental involvement in their children's education. The social movements of this time became pathways for women to enter politics. Joan joined the Australian Labor Party and entered politics in 1982 as the member for Melbourne West. As a minister in the long-running Kane government, Joan Kirner and Heather Mitchell created Landcare. Joan moved to the lower house in 1988 and became deputy leader of the ALP in 1989. A year later, John Cain resigned and she became Premier. But Joan inherited a deep-rooted political and economic crisis in the state. She withstood constant sexist attacks from a voracious press, and although popular with Victorians on a personal level, she was unable to unite the party, and the Labor Party badly lost the 1992 election. She retired from politics a short time later, but she wasn't finished yet. She became a fierce advocate for more progressive women in politics and lent strong support for the effort to decriminalise abortion in Victoria. Sadly, her health declined in 2009 and she died in 2015. A hospital in St Albans is named after her in recognition of her tireless advocacy for women and children. In our arts section for Women's History Month this week, we have another viewer suggestion, Annabella Boswell. Born Annabella Innes in Bathurst Plains, New South Wales in 1826, Annabella was the eldest daughter of Scottish-born landholders. Intelligent and educated, Annabella was one of those women who can do anything. She could churn milk into butter, she was a great gardener, she was an excellent artist, she was a wonderful pianist, she was also an amazing writer. Most importantly for Australian women histories, Annabella was a prolific diarist. Her journals and letters provide a unique insight into the life of the landed gentry in a newly colonised country, and is all told through the eyes of a teenage girl in the early 19th century of regional Australia. Annabella married in 1856 and with her husband and children emigrated to Scotland, but she never lost her affection for her Australian home. She published her diaries in rich and vivid detail, and so fortunately for us that we have access to this amazing resource. She's a fabulous example of how important it is for women to write their life stories and make sure they get them out there. I never heard of Annabella, so thanks so much for this suggestion. Today for our Science Day of Women's History Month, I get to use the word clitoris. Now, if you don't know what that is or where it is, then go do some Googling and then come back when you figured it out. Because today we're going to talk about Professor Helen O'Connell. She was Australia's first female urologist and the first person to completely map the full anatomy and nerve pathways of the clitoris. And when did she accomplish this? Not that long ago, in 1998. The world's oldest anatomy book dates to 1543. So why does it take 450 odd years to map an entire organ of the female body? In short, it's because women's purpose in life was reproduction, and the writers of these books were all a little bit too squeamish to include an organ designed entirely for women's sexual pleasure. So, Professor O'Connell set out to rectify that. And she had to do it in her spare time because she couldn't get any institutional funding for the project. By 1998, she had discovered that instead of just a nub of tissue, the clitoris was in fact otherworldly in shape. And she began investigating how it worked, why it worked the way it does, and even just what it looked like internally. I wish I could say that medical acknowledgement of the essential role in the clitoris of women having a satisfying sex life has improved, but no, it hasn't. However, women across the world have celebrated Professor O'Connell's work through art and literature. This picture was actually taken at my train station. These days, all Professor O'Connell wants is for women's body to be considered equal to men. And that means overcoming institutional and social prejudice against women enjoying their own sexuality. Doesn't really seem like that much to ask for, does it? Despite property laws that worked against them and prohibitions on what women could and couldn't do, many early Australian women managed to run very successful businesses. For our Businesswoman of the Week, we're going to look at Caroline Hodgson. Caroline was born Caroline Lohmar in Potsdam, Prussia in 1851. She married Studholm Hodgson in 1871 and the new couple moved to Melbourne. Before long, she amicably separated from her husband and set herself up as Madame Brussels, the owner of a series of brothels in Little Lonsdale Street. She was really good at it too. Her premium establishments offered luxurious surroundings, food and drink of the highest quality, music, dancing and card games as a prelude to sexual activity. Her businesses survived over 30 years and she became the most celebrated madam of her day. She had quite the colourful love life too and came to represent the racy side of the marvellous Melbourne era of the late 1890s. When Caroline died in 1908, her probate records revealed gold, diamonds, sapphires and a little silver purse in which was a small copper coin. It was believed this was an early contraceptive device. Madame Brussels is the subject of a recent book on her life, and her name used to adorn a very cool Melbourne cocktail bar that sadly closed in 2021, a victim of Melbourne's COVID lockdowns.